You are listening to Small Business Straight Talk with your host, Amber De La Garza. Amber is a sought-after coach, trainer, speaker, and writer who gives small business owners the straight talk on productivity, time management, business systems, leading your teams, strategic decision-making, and mindset. No BS, fluff, or overused jargon. Just actionable strategies to get results and succeed in business. And here is your host, Amber De La Garza, the productivity specialist.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to the Small Business Straight Talk podcast. Today is episode 339, The Role of a Small Business Attorney in Your Legal Matters, with Elissa D. Hecker. If you're a small business owner who wants to learn effective business strategies, improve time management, and elevate productivity to maximize profits, reduce stress, and make time for what matters most, then you're in the right place, and I'm so glad you've joined me. Today, you get to meet our guest, Elissa Hecker. As a go-to general counsel to small businesses, solopreneurs, and entrepreneurs in their legal and business affairs across the U.S., Elissa guides her clients through strategic thought processes, how to negotiate from a position of strength, protect their brands and intellectual property, set up their legal infrastructure so that they're protected, including contracts, licensing, digital issues, trademarks, and copyrights, and work on independent contractor and employee issues, among many others. Elissa also practices in the field of entertainment, art, and book publishing, and is a repeat super lawyer, top lawyers, and best lawyers in America. Elissa helps people make money and grow relationships. I was really looking forward to bringing her on because I know that this is a need for so many business owners. And you may or may not know, I really, truly believe that having your special advisory counsel is a highly productive and profitable thing to do. You do not want to wait until you're in trouble or there's a challenge or a crisis to be looking for an attorney. You want to have someone that you could have in your corner to consult with on issues so that they don't become bigger. And I felt that this was going to be a great interview to talk about all the different ways a small business owner can utilize an attorney and what that relationship might look like. Before we dive into this conversation with Elissa, I want to invite you to take my next level business owner quiz. What's more productive than taking a short 3-minute quiz to help you find out what's most holding you back and getting a personalized playlist to help you solve those pain points? Take 3 minutes, pause this episode right now, and head on over to amberdelagarza.com/quiz. Take the short quiz, receive specific feedback on what is holding you back from getting your business to the next level, and then resources that specifically solve that with a curated playlist. And now, let's meet our guest and get to the straight talk. Welcome, Elissa. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm looking forward to our conversation. We just did a little pre-chat, which you teased me with what we get to talk about today. Before we jump into that, though, I would love for you to share a bit about yourself with our listeners that we didn't hear in your bio, a little bit about your background and how you became a small business attorney.
Sure. And thank you for asking. I've had my own practice for 20 years. I was in-house counsel in a music agency prior to that. Always wanted to be a lawyer, loved being a lawyer, grew up daughter of a lawyer, and I worked for him for years. And he was he did pretty much everything, was primarily in the arts and copyright space. So I'm also an entertainment and arts attorney, which was how I started. But then I found that I loved working with small businesses and solopreneurs and entrepreneurs because they think very much like my creative clients. They're all trying to change the world for the better. Very often it's based on relationships. I don't like going in and out in just a transactional relationship. I like to come in with them, act as, as we were talking about earlier, as a trusted advisor, really know what's going on with their families, what's going on with their business, how to help scale or maintain. And I just love relationships and people, and working with small businesses is all about relationships.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it. Other than that, I'm a dog mom, a human mom, a wife, a former dancer. And I just love being a lawyer. So I think it's really because of the clients that I represent, which just makes it interesting every single day.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I would love to know, what types of things do you help small business owners on? Like, what are their particular legal challenges that they need support with?
Sure. Well, to start with, a lot of folks come to me and they're like, we are in a partnership, or I have a handshake deal or something like that. And we talk about, is it really a partnership? Should you be creating an LLC or a corporation? What's a good legal structure for an entity? Because if you don't have a legal structure and you do have a business, you're open to personal liability issues. And it's always better to have some sort of legal entity so that your private assets are shielded. And if there's an issue, people can only go after the corporate assets. So that's the kind of thing. And when folks are like, we're in a partnership,
Mm.
I like to remind them that you're probably in a collaboration, because a partnership is something that the IRS and the states look at in a certain tax way where you're not actually a partnership. You may be a consultant, you may be working in collaboration. So there's a lot of different words in like the English lexicon that are different in the legal lexicon. So I need to make sure that we know exactly what we're doing and what the business wants to do. Very often folks come to me and they're like, we have an agreement, but a client's not paying or something. And I ask to see their agreement, and it's really a term sheet. So it's basically, here are my deliverables. Here's what you're paying me. But there's no
Mm.
legal protection around it. So very often, like for service providers, I would like to put together a master services agreement, which explains the roadmap to the relationship between the one who's providing the service and the one who's receiving it. And what happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? And then what we do is we create a Schedule A, which is the term sheet for that particular job for that particular client. So if they want to move forward with their relationships, they just add additional schedules so that they never have to renegotiate the main agreement. They already understand who they are to each other.
And I just want to kind of
Yeah.
ask you some questions with that. So, do
Sure.
you help them draft those agreements and or edit ones that they already have?
Usually I say, show me what you have in their term sheets. So instead of editing that, I like to draft them from scratch because I know that they're getting what they need. A lot of folks also use online services or cut and paste from the internet,
Mm-hmm.
which is really tough because there's no such thing as a cookie cutter agreement. I draft specifically for that person, specifically for that business, for specifically for the purposes. And I also know the various laws of the areas where they want to be covered. So sometimes cutting and pasting can make more harm than not, or using something like an online service that may cost you $25 or $30 can actually hurt you in the long run. So I definitely customize the agreements that I do for my clients, whether they're representing clients or they're selling goods to customers. There are other things that I do, like I'll review leases for storefronts. I do a lot of work on branding and trademarks to help protect your trademarks, because your trademarks, your copyright, your content, which are your intellectual property, are really such valuable assets to your company, especially if you want to get bigger in scale, if you want to sell, or just for brand recognition and for people to know that what you do or what you sell is really good and based on the brand that you've built.
All
So
right.
those are some basics, and negotiations and, all
Yeah.
sorts of stuff, transactions, any kind of transaction.
And you help them get their copyright or their registered trademark?
Yes, I can do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then defending it. That's what the experience I've had with that, having to defend your trademark.
Yes. Well, once you have a trademark, you have an obligation to go out and police it to make sure that no one else is using it so it doesn't become diluted.
Mm-hmm.
Like tissues, elevator, those were all once actual trademarks, but because it became part of our conversation, they lost the protection. So that's something that you want to make sure you can go after. So that's cease and desist letters, or we try to solve that creatively where you're not necessarily going out with a heavy hand, but like, hey, I didn't know if you knew. And very often there's a great way to settle or or have them stop using. Or in one case, I had a client who wanted someone else to stop using her trademark. And he's like, we really like it. Can I buy it from you? And she was like, well, I actually was thinking of doing something else anyway. So sure. So we structured this great deal where he paid a lot of money, didn't know that she was planning on moving from it anyway. She walked away really happy and started a new brand.
Wow.
So you just never know.
Yeah. That's a best case scenario for sure. I wanted to just address, what are some of the reasons you think that business owners are hesitant to reach out and get an attorney on their team or their special advisory council?
Yeah. The number one reason, well, I'd say two top reasons. The first reason is they think it costs a fortune. And the second one is nothing's happened to me yet, so I don't need a lawyer. So being reactive rather than proactive. And for the first one, small business attorneys do not require $25,000 retainers, or should not require what a litigation attorney requires, or a big firm or something like that. We work with solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, small businesses. My goal as an attorney is to have folks be able to, especially if you're starting or in your first 2 years, put as much money back into the business to grow the business as possible while knowing that you're protected. So I have a rate that is very reasonable for small businesses and a much smaller retainer. As a matter of fact, I don't even have a retainer letter because if it's under a certain amount, you don't need one unless a client wants it. And then very often with my clients, we'll work on that level. And then once a retainer is paid, it's just a monthly bill. Or I'll say a question no one's ever heard before, which is, what is your legal budget? And people are like, I've never thought about that. So I'd say, here's what I think you need based on our conversations and getting to know each other. Tell me what you can afford. We'll work with that and I'll give you the protections. My goal is for you to grow into my rate. And then we can grow together. And that really develops that trusted advisor relationship. So it's not just, it's an in and out transaction. This is a long-term relationship, which is really important to have with your insurance broker, your accountant, your lawyer, because you don't have in-house finance, legal, accounting, all of that stuff. It's important to have that on the outset. And then the other one was nothing's happened to me yet, or I feel very lucky. And the whole point of having a lawyer on board is to make sure that nothing does happen or things happen easier. Because when you have agreements in place, when you have understandings in place, when you have your roadmaps to your relationships, then you're able to say, if there's a disagreement, oh, wait, it's here. We already discussed this.
Yeah.
Or we know we want to grow bigger. So how do we plan to make it easier and bigger so we know in advance what's going to happen? And if someone doesn't pay, for example, in your agreements, you have what happens if someone doesn't pay. And everything is much easier. Or if someone sues you, for example, you have your corporate entity set up. So you're able to do that and not worry about losing your house or your car or your kid's college fund or things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to be caught, back on your heels playing defense and then looking for an attorney and then asking for referrals and then interviewing.
Yeah.
You want
and it's scary.
It is, but and you want that relationship where you're like, already we're going to say, this isn't a great scenario, but we're going to make the best of it because I have a trusted relationship with my attorney and they're going to advise me. That whole situation is not if it's going to happen, but when.
It's when.
Right?
Yep.
And so why not be proactive and build those relationships?
Right.
You had mentioned, a really good point about the client agreement and then having to enforce it. So we assume we spend the money, we hire an attorney, we get this beautiful, fully executed contract and agreement. We have client after client sign it, and then we get that difficult client. We get the client that is in breach of the contract or doesn't want to fulfill the contract. And that can feel it could feel a lot of different ways, but you're much more able to handle that situation if you have an attorney you can reach out to. And I just wanted you to talk through what that scenario looks like, because oftentimes the business owner still wants to be in relationship with that client. They just want them to perform to what they had agreed to. How does that usually work, and what kind of support do you provide for the business owner to ensure?
I'll answer like a lawyer. It depends. So it depends on the situation. how well established is the relationship with that client? Is it a new one? Is it a long-term? Do you know what's going on in that client's world? Like, why is this happening? Very often I'll build into the agreements that this is the payment schedule, this is the amount, this is by when it has to be paid. It's often at the discretion of the person as to whether or not you give a grace period. And then I'll also build in, if it's the money's not paid by a certain time, there's an interest rate. And if someone has to sue to collect, that all of the costs have to be paid by that client rather than the one who's writing. So there are things, and very often with small businesses, you have agreements that are for amounts that could be dealt with in small claims court, or something that's a smaller amount where you don't really have to go into court. I also try to draft the agreements where there are alternate dispute resolution mechanisms, meaning they go to mediation and arbitration rather than court. Because for small businesses, mediation is when you can sit down with a mediator who talks it out between the two sides. You can come to an agreement and you can move forward, which is usually what happens with clients who have really good relationships with the customer's client. It's not binding, meaning you can't really enforce it, but it's an agreement to move forward and make sure something is resolved. If that doesn't work, you go to arbitration, which is binding, but it's usually one person sits there as the judge. It's way less expensive. It's way less time consuming. It is private and not public. And it's much easier to resolve an issue and move on. So I put those structures in the agreements, and then also work and strategize. How do you want to approach this? What do we want to do? What do you want to get out of it? You want to perhaps offer a payment plan just for this one time, various different things. Or if it's a client who's just not responding and it's not a good deal, that's when you say, okay, we're going to mediation. It really depends on the circumstances.
So that brings up another great transition into what we wanted to talk about, which was advocating for yourself or your business. And part of enforcing the client agreement is advocating and negotiating, saying what it is that you want to have happen. I would love your opinion on that and maybe some tips.
Sure. Well, one of the things I love to do, because very often with small businesses, folks have never really, as you said, advocate for themselves before. They've either worked for other people, other companies, or they're not quite sure what to charge, how to value. I know how to do this so well, so it's probably worth a little less. Like, very often it's hard to figure out how much to charge or how much to do things when you're putting together a proposal or setting up a price for goods. So things like that. So one of the things initially I'll work on with my clients is, what's your value? What are you worth? This is your time. This is, you're putting out money to buy things or build things, or you have knowledge and know-how that no one else has, which is why they're hiring you.
Right.
So the value on that first. And then sometimes if it's a service client, for example, like a coach or a consultant, you may be hired by another company, and that company sends you its contract. Everything is negotiable. So you go through the contract and you're like, wait, here's what I think I'm going to offer. I don't like this. I do like that. So I always say, go through it, figure out what you want, figure out what you don't want, which is just as important, because they may ask you to do things or sign over certain things that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
For clients, for example, who are coaches and they bring in their know-how and their systems and their processes to all of their clients, I make sure to draft a provision in there that the materials they may be creating for this client are to be owned by the client, but they retain all of the rights into their know-how and methodologies. So they're giving a license to their client to use it for the sole purpose of that particular deliverable, but the client cannot go out and do anything else outside of that with the know-how, and that the client, who's the coach, is able to take everything that he or she or they are coming in with and work with other clients. As long as it's not using competitive information. So, things like that are all built in, which is something, when you have a small business and you want to get work, very often you take everything that comes in. And it's really good to be able to look through and say, is this worth my time? Is this worth my money? Am I willing to walk away if they don't move on certain provisions? So it's a lot of trying to figure out and work through. And also, I have to really get to know my client and know what's happening. What are the timeframes? For example, if there is a particular deliverable and it's due within 3 months, what's going on with my client? Like, is the owner of the business taking care of a sick parent? Do you have something that, like, can you make these timeframes and still be able to live your life? And
Yeah.
these are the kinds of things we talk through, and then we work on negotiating points. Very often, if my client has a relationship and wants to keep the relationship, I'll say, these are the points I think you should discuss and not necessarily bring in the attorneys because it's much gentler and
Yeah.
it's more of a conversation. If it becomes a little bit more serious or you're dealing with a larger company on the other side, we'll do the lawyers, we'll talk it through, and you can keep your distance and keep your relationship and just kind of say, oh, my lawyer said I have to have that. Let the lawyers talk. So there are different ways to strategize of how to negotiate, but I always walk my clients through because the more you do it, the more it becomes muscle memory and the more confidence you have over an issue spotting over what you have. The more contracts you'll be able to look at and be like, oh, I know I don't want that. And I really want that. And I'm glad that's in there. Or I'm going to add my own language.
Yeah. I mean, that brings up another service and is that you're constantly getting into new contracts or working with another company. This is a new agreement to you. And oftentimes we may get the gist of it, but do we know exactly what we're agreeing to if
Right.
we don't have our lawyer review it
Right.
and say, hey, this one might be a red flag, or do you really understand what you're agreeing to here?
Right.
You could be saving tons of time, money, relationships by just
Mhm.
getting that, oversight and consultation on the agreement.
Absolutely. Like I always tell my clients, I don't know how to sell widgets. That is not my thing, but I know how to protect your widgets and your
Mm,
business. And then I'll come to you and buy those widgets, but I would never open a shop because that's not my thing.
yeah.
So we work together.
Yeah. I mean, you really opened it up with the beginning of like, maybe it's a money issue, a myth of like how much it costs, but
Mhm.
also waiting. And it- you are, I would say a third one is that they haven't quite valued keeping their money. So they're worried, they want
That's a
to
good
like
one. Yep.
earn it, right? And
Yep.
they want to build this business, but
Mhm.
what does that look like to actually keep it? And
Right.
a good lawyer, a CPA,
I was gonna say
all about
lawyer,
keeping the
accountant,
money.
bookkeeper, insurance, like these are all the folks you need to
Yes,
have in your corner. And
yes.
very often we talk to each other because
Mhm.
we help protect you, the business.
Right.
So there'll be times where like we wouldn't necessarily reach out, but if the client wants to put us in touch to make sure that all like I'll often say too, this is a great thing to have. For example, if we're setting up an operating agreement for an LLC, for example, and there are investors or there's a bank who wants to do something. And I'll say, I can structure it this way. I want you to double check with your accountant to make sure that for tax purposes, this is the most beneficial one for you. And very often I'll end up talking to the accountant too, because we want what's best for the client. So I know there are options, but I don't know what the best tax option may be for that one. And I know the
Right.
legal protections behind each one. So we would work as a team together.
Excellent. Are there any other tips that you want to give small business owners in protecting the money they've earned, getting the representation that they need? Is there anything else that I have not asked you that you would like to share with your like ideal small business client, right? You're like, to be a great client, here's my tips. Do this, this, and this to protect yourself.
Ask a lot of questions. It's
Mm,
always important to ask questions because if you don't understand something, you'll never understand it. There's no too small a question, especially with regard to your business. I have a lot of clients who I love when they come in. We're like, we talked about this or that. And they say, is there anything I might not have thought about that's important at this stage? And we'll really go through what's happening. And, I might say yes, and I might say, no, we're good for a while.
yeah,
And also, when working with a small business attorney, you may have a lot of work up front, but what we draft for you, you can use over and over and over again. So you don't have to be paying a lawyer every month for work. It's
right.
really just for work when you need it. So it depends on the business, but I think the protection, like I was saying, of your intellectual property, of your confidential information and your proprietary information is very important. Having the right agreements in place, having the right terms in your agreements in place,
Hmm.
um, and just really valuing, your relationships with your clients and your customers, and having these agreements and having the corporate entities and stuff also make you seem, because you are much more professional. And
Yeah.
it may also make you seem bigger than you are. And then you can go after larger clients and customers.
Yeah, we have other episodes we'll link to, but we've talked about the incredible importance of having a good client agreement with regards to boundaries and how that affects your time and your
Absolutely.
profitability. Because if you don't have good terms and your client and you are not on the same page, it is a huge profit leak because there's scope
Yes.
creep and there's
Yes.
misunderstandings and then there's drama. And so this is truly an asset that you're making an investment in your business. And this is why I wanted to invite you onto the podcast, because I help business owners grow their business, but it's equally as important to have your team that's helping you keep the business. And entrepreneurship, solopreneurship can be incredibly lonely, but when you build that, trusted advisory council around you, there's confidence in that. There is support in that.
Yes. And then there are two things that you said that raised a bell. One is about scope creep.
Yeah.
I had a client recently who's like, I'm up for this job and we're agreeing to 20 hours, but I know that this is they're going to want more. So what we build into it specifically is, if it's over 20 hours and you both parties have to agree to it, they have to pay a premium rate. So you've got the protection of the person offering the services has to be okay with it and agree to it. And B, knowing that they'll get paid more for that. The other side may think twice before doing scope creep, or they both agree to it and the person gets paid twice as much. So there are things that you can build in for that. And when you were talking about the community, another thing that small business lawyers do is that we represent all sorts of businesses. So what happens if I know a client is doing certain things and I know other people in my network who can help them as a resource, I'm constantly introducing people to each other to help their businesses, really work together and potentially get to the next level or this or that. Like, would this be a good introduction for you? Would that be a good introduction for you? How could this help you? Because we're all out in various different networks.
Yeah, I love that you shared that. And that was a really good point, is that you don't need to be specializing in a specific industry or niche, but that you can help small business owners in general for what their legal needs are.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, excellent. I would love for you to share with our listeners where they can find you, if they wanted to work with you and reach out to you, where would they do that?
Thank you. Well, my website is eheckeresq.com. That's eheckeresq.com. I am located in New York, but I have clients all over the country and actually internationally, because I don't litigate. So I'm able to help you in where you are. My number is 914-478-0457. And my email is eheckeresq@eheckeresq.com.
Excellent. And we'll make sure we put all that in the show notes for sure so that they can reach out. Thank you so much for enlightening us and just opening up the conversation of what that partnership between a business owner and a lawyer can look like, and the types of services that are available so that a business owner feels fully supported.
Yeah. Thank you. This is fun.
I have loved having you listen to this episode of the Small Business Straight Talk podcast. And I sure hope you found my conversation with Elissa to be valuable and insightful, and most importantly, actionable. No change, no change. Without taking action, nothing will change for you or your business. Do you have an attorney, specifically a business attorney, in your special advisory council? Do you have a relationship with a business attorney that you can go to, not if, but when legal matters arise? I want to share with you some episodes that I think you'll find valuable that really complement this conversation. And that's going to be episode 138, How to Stop Your Clients from Trampling Your Boundaries, with Melissa Morris. In that episode, we talk a lot about client agreements and contracts. In episode 195, Difficult Conversations, Strategies for Navigating Everyone's Kryptonite, with Laura Curry. Episode 232, Red Flag Client, Recognizing the Warning Signs. And then episode 293, De-Escalating Conflicts, the Fastest and Most Effective Way, with Doug Knoll. Of course, as always, all of these links will be shared with you in the show notes. You can access those by heading on over to amberdelagarza.com/339. Again, that's amberdelagarza.com/339. And before we close out, I want to know if you would like to work with me. I work with my clients in two very specific ways. One is my group business coaching program, Leverage Lab. And the second way is in my private peak performance business coaching program. If either of these sound interesting to you, you can learn more and schedule a discovery call by heading on over to amberdelagarza.com. And if you are new here, I want to be sure to thank you and welcome you to the Small Business Straight Talk podcast. Hit subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And if you're a longtime listener, my deepest gratitude. Thank you so much. And my ask for you is do not keep this podcast a secret. If you have a favorite episode or just this episode, share it with a fellow business owner who you think would find it valuable. So that's my straight talk for today. Until next time, have a productive week.